I'm so excited. I love this movie.
Ryan, it's about to start.
Sorry.
Hello and welcome back to The Real. I'm Meredith.
And I'm Ryan.
And this is the podcast where we talk about movies that our teacher, Mr. Binder, has recommended to us.
Speaking of Mr. Binder, he actually is joining us for this episode. Say hello.
Hello.
This week he recommended that we watch 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, hang on a second. I'll make something perfectly clear. I did not recommend this movie. You asked me to recommend a movie that I do not like, that lots of other people apparently like or rave about. So, to anyone who's listening, I do not recommend this movie.
Yeah, that's very important. But yeah, so 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in 1968. It's by Stanley Kubrick, who's done a bunch of other things: The Shining, A Clockwork Orange. He's a pretty decent movie maker. What do you think, Mr. Binder? Do you have any opinions about Kubrick himself?
No, I don't have anything against the man himself. I mean, he has a very... I think he started making movies in the 50s, all the way up into the 80s. Eyes Wide Shut, I think, was his last one. So I can't remember the year on that. So that's a pretty impressive, filmography that he has. But I guess in general, I just don't like Stanley Kubrick films. I mean, I could have listed any of the ones. 2001 comes after Doctor Strangelove. And Doctor Strangelove, it's a weird movie. Like, I enjoy that. It has a really iconic scene at the end of it. And it's kind of humorous. So there's things I like in Doctor Strangelove. But overall, it's one of those movies, if I see it once, I don't need to see it again. And then you have Clockwork Orange is another one. It's just odd. It's very violent. And it's just not in my wheelhouse. Even The Shining, like, I enjoy this. Well, I watched The Shining is one of those movies I can see once. It's a horror movie. It's well done. 2001 though just grates at me.
If you're not familiar with 2001: A Space Odyssey, this is the description. When Dr. Dave Bowman and other astronauts are sent on a mysterious mission, their ship's computer system, HAL, begins to display increasingly strange behavior, leading up to a tense showdown between man and machine that results in a mind-bending trek through space and time.
So now I think we'll get into the plot a bit, and Mr. Binder, wherever you have a comment to make or a point to make, just go ahead and sort of state your mind.
Sounds like a plan.
It. All right, so the movie opens with the dawn of time.
With 3 minutes of a black screen and just music, let me say.
Yeah, 3 minutes of music and a black screen, and then it opens on the dawn of time, and you see these Neanderthals kind of making their way around a desert.
And I think you need to add there the music in the background. I can't remember the name of it, but it's that famous tune that you hear everywhere. We use it every year also in our program.
Yeah, it's called Also sprach Zarathustra. It's a German orchestration.
So I knew the German student would get that, even though I spoke German. I just couldn't remember the name, but very well done.
Yeah, but for those who don't know it by the name, because people don't usually know things by the name, like orchestra pieces by their names. It's the one that like plays in most, like a lot of space movies.
Oh, I would love to hear Ryan give us a couple bars on it.
Try?
I'm trying to think of it.
I could just start it. Duh.
Oh, I don't remember it. Oh, man.
Would you like
I don't
to
think
give
Ryan
us?
was paying attention during this movie. That's my thought.
At some points, it felt like I wasn't.
It's like da 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 da.
Yeah,
there we go.
It's kind of used to symbolize like something significant or like a huge change is happening. And so they use it through the first like 15 minutes when all these Neanderthals are kind of just moving around. At one point, one of them picks up a bone, and the music comes back in really strong to like symbolize, like, oh, this is a great advancement.
He's like learning to use tools or something.
Yeah, using weapons.
And he starts just beating like a skull with this bone. It's really weird.
But, they start using them as like actual weapons, like against
and then
other
they start fighting
groups
each
of
other.
Neanderthals. Yeah, and so that goes on for about 15 minutes. And then it cuts to several million years later. And there's just then about like 25 minutes of just footage of spaceships and like going through. We followed one character who's kind of making his way to a moon base.
Well, yeah, but there's more classical music in there.
Yeah, that's the
waltz.
Danube Waltz.
That's right, the Danube Waltz is in there. And there's actually something that they teach in film class comes right from 2001. They're like beating on the bones, right? And then the one monkey or ape or whatever throws the bone in the air, and the camera follows the bone up into the sky as it's going up. And then as it starts to come down, you jump forward in time to the spaceship that's flying around the Earth in space. And they use that all the time as like one of the greatest match cuts and oh, look at this vision and these special effects. And I don't even think it's a really good match cut. I mean, I use it in Comtech 1, but it's just, I don't know. It just,
the camera work, a lot of times I thought was not very good. Like specifically with that part, there's like several parts where the bone is just like half off the screen. Like they didn't really follow it very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Like for the bone part, especially later on, they got a bit better with the camera work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So after this advancement of a million years or so, we're following this one guy. I think he was like a doctor or something, and he was making his way to a moon base, and he stops at like a space station to rest, and like it's kind of like a oh my gosh, what's the word? It's kind of like a layover between Earth and the moon base that he's going to, and he has a conversation
with product placement from Pan Am Airlines, an airline that was actually really, really big in the 1960s. They actually made a television show out of it called Pan Am. But Pan Am went out of business, I guess in the 1980s. But if I remember right, they're flying Pan Am to get to the moon base, which in the 60s, that was funny because that was a commercial airline flying you to space. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so he sort of meets this group of Russians on this layover, and they ask him like, oh, what are you going to do on this planet? And he says that he can't talk about it, so we obviously know something's going on. And then...
As if you didn't have enough questions already at this point.
Yeah, they're just like hinting that something big is going on this moon base that he's going to. And then it kind of skips to him getting to the moon base and going directly into a meeting with like everyone. Basically, the Russians were like, we heard that a huge epidemic broke out on this planet. Can you tell us anything about it? And then he goes to the planet and you can see that like everything's fine because there's like a huge board meeting going on and like all the official people are there. And everyone seems fine. And then he reveals that the epidemic was like a cover-up for a mission that they're going on. So he and a couple other guys go out to a crater on this moon base, and they find this big alien monolith thing.
And the monolith was present in the opening scene with the monkeys or Neanderthals or whatever they were.
The monkeys were like the first ones to see it, and they were like, it drove them kind of crazy. And then
and for anybody who hasn't seen the movie, the monolith, this basically looks like a big black door.
Yeah,
that's all it is, just in the middle of nowhere. It's just this big black, no features, no doorknob, but it's like that shape about that. Bigger than that.
I
think it was bigger, but it's just a big black rectangle basically.
Really strange.
Yeah,
very
and then
strange.
The sun, as they're like at the crater investigating this monolith, the sun like kind of comes around and it hits the monolith and it starts making this really loud like ringing noise.
It was actually kind of funny because they were like posing for a picture in front of it and then it just starts like screeching.
Yeah. And then that's where that portion of the film kind of ends and it skips to 18 months later. And in this 18 months later, there's a new crew on a ship going to Jupiter to investigate something. I think it's one of these moons.
Europa.
Okay. So there's Frank and Dave, who are two astronauts, and then there's three other scientists who are in like a hibernation in like these pods on the ship, and then there's the computer HAL 9000, which is this super technologically advanced computer that never makes mistakes, and like everyone trusts it to completely man the ship and make sure they get there safely.
And do you know what the rumored story is of how Hal got his name?
I did hear this because my friend's dad is a film buff, and I was telling him I was watching this movie. I forget exactly what the name of the company was, but it's like IBM. So each letter, like IBM, each letter before it spells out Hal. So I becomes H, B becomes A, and M becomes L. Mm-hmm. And so that's Hal 9000. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's this big computer that basically controls everything on the ship, and everyone trusts it because it's never made a mistake before.
And I want to be really clear about one thing. Mm-hmm. I love Hal. Hal is probably one of in one of the worst movies that I can watch. Mm-hmm. Hal is probably one of my favorite movie characters ever.
He was great.
Yeah, just has this iconic voice, and it's not supposed to have feelings, but
he was like kind of creepy in a way.
That's what I'm saying. You can tell he's kind of psychotic. Yeah. So
mm-hmm. I kind of like the way that they used like a fisheye lens to show like Hal was seeing things that were happening. I thought that was really interesting. And so Dave and Frank are just kind of doing operations on the ship, whatever. And then they start talking to Hal a bit more, and they kind of like Hal starts to express concerns about the mission and like how secretive everything was about it. And then he says, like, out of nowhere that a satellite is starting to fail, and if they don't fix it, it'll completely fail within, like, 72 hours. So Dave is the one who goes out. He goes out into this, they called it an EVA pod, but it's basically just, like, a little ship that they use to get out into space, like, outside of the ship. He goes out to inspect, but he doesn't find anything. So he comes back in, and Frank and Dave talk to Hal again, and Hal suggests that they let the satellite fail, which would cut off their communications. But he says that letting it fail will help them realize the problem, so they consult Mission Control about it, and Mission Control says that Hal's wrong, which doesn't happen. The Hal 9000 is never supposed to fail. But Hal says, like, oh, it's a human error, don't worry, like, I'm right about this. So you can start to see, like, there's something going on. Maybe there's
a conflict there. Yeah.
And the panic of the two men starts to rise, and eventually they get into, like, they go into, like, some room where Hal, like, can't hear them because Hal's, like, connected to the ship. He can hear everything they say. So they're sitting in, like, a little pod thing, and they're talking about disconnecting him, thinking that he can't hear them, but in reality, he can see them through a window and he can read their lips.
Which is shot really well. I thought that part was really great.
Yeah, that part was really good. Yeah, I enjoyed that whole scene. And then it skips to an intermission, just a 1-minute title screen with intermission written on it, and then 2 minutes of just black screen.
I feel like if you have to put an intermission in your movie, it's too long.
Yeah, it was like an hour and 30 minutes in, and there was just an hour left. But yeah, that was from the point of like the 45 minutes of music and like everything to this point, it felt like much hadn't happened.
Yeah.
Which I was kind of like, oh, it feels weird to be taking a break when just this little amount of like plot has actually happened. So then it skips back to, I think it was Frank goes out like on a spacewalk to check out the satellite again.
Was he in a pod or was he on his own?
I think he was on his own.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he was just out, like connected, but then his connections get severed and he goes like hurtling off into space.
Mysteriously.
Yeah, mysteriously, very mysterious. So Dave goes out in a pod to save him, and he like grabs him with these metal hooks on the end of the pod, and
that's right.
Sort of brings him back to the ship.
He gets like to the bay door, and he's asking Hal to open the door for him to let him back in, and Hal refuses.
Yeah, that actually is one of the most famous scenes in that movie. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, for me, not really liking this movie too much, that is probably one of my favorite lines in all of cinema too, where he says, I think the quote is, "Open the pod bay doors, Hal," and Hal goes, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that," or something like that.
Yeah. That was where I was like, oh no.
Oh, the robot
This is about to get really bad. This is about to get really bad. And I want to add, while Dave was out rescuing Frank, it cuts back to Hal, like, just shot of Hal, and then like shots of the empty ship and like the offices and stuff, and then it shows like the different pods that the scientists who are in hibernation are in, and then it cuts to the computer and it says computer malfunction, and then it starts showing like all of their health stats are like decreasing and they're all flatlining, and so basically one can assume that Hal caused this computer malfunction that killed the 3 scientists. So now Dave is basically on his own because Frank is dead from being hurtled out into space. So
at least you think he's dead.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like he's dead, but also in the next part, Dave says like, okay, I'll just go in through the airlock. Like, he doesn't have a helmet with him, which is dangerous, but he has to get back inside or else he'll die. So
that part made no sense. Like, how does that physically happen? I don't understand
think that was very scientifically accurate.
Oh, no. I want to come back to that in a second.
Okay.
But remember that. We need to discuss that scene.
Okay. I was just going to say, so Dave says that he'll go in through the airlock, and so he lets go of Frank, and as the little hooks are, like, letting go of Frank, I saw his hand move. And I was like, oh no, he's still alive. And then Frank just goes like shooting off into space, like spinning away. And that's the end of Frank. And so now would you like to discuss the airlock scene?
No, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Because that's more for the synopsis when I want to explain at the end why this movie annoys me so much.
Okay. So Dave like lines the pod up with the airlock and I think triggers like an explosion inside of the pod, so he gets like launched into the room and he hits the button and the airlock closes and he's like fine and he's back on the ship now. And so he puts one of the helmets on just to make sure like this wouldn't happen again. And then he goes.
Well, I think Hal took all the air out of the ship by opening the airlock. All the air went out of the ship, so he had to have his helmet on. When he was back inside the ship.
And so then Dave goes to the like main control room. It's all these walls of just red lights with like different
I liked this
systems
scene.
on it.
This scene was pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I really like this scene. He goes up to the control panel that like runs Hal, and he starts unscrewing like the pieces of the control panel that operate Hal, and so.
They kind of like humanize him too, like as he's disconnecting Hal's like I guess they're like memory drives or something. Hal is like talking to Dave and he's like, "Please stop, Dave." And he keeps saying, "I'm afraid" over and over, and he says, "I can feel it." It's like,
he's pleading basically for his life, even though he's a computer.
It's a very emotionless plea, but it was still like, wow.
Yeah,
kind of. And then Hal like starts to reboot kind of, and he's like, "Welcome, gentlemen. Like I am Hal 9000, whatever."
And Daisy, isn't this? He's singing the song Daisy or something.
I wrote that down. Hal was like, "Would you like me to sing a song for you?" And Dave, as he's unscrewing, he's like, "Yes, Hal, please sing a song for me." And so he sings the song Daisy, which is from like the 50s, and I think it's one of the creepiest songs ever written.
Oh yeah.
It's like
well, it's a kid's song. It's a very childlike song, which I think is why he does it, because Daisy's a song sung by a kid who's very innocent. So you're trying to portray Hal as just being this innocent, psychotic killer. It's a very weird contrast right there.
Yeah, but the words of the song are creepy, and people have been using it on TikTok as like they've made like really creepy versions of it where it sounds like really echoey and weird, and they've been using it to show like weird abandoned places and like broken down
like
machines and stuff. Yeah,
but I mean that's exactly why they're doing it. It's coming right from that scene right there, because if you've never seen it, he's singing Daisy somewhat normally for a robot, and as he's getting disconnected and
it gets
dying,
more
his
and more
voice gets deeper and like more like
it gets slower, and
slower.
like more agonizing almost to listen to.
Deeper, just really creepy scenes. So
yeah. And then so Dave successfully disconnects Hal, and so Hal is just gone at this point. And then a video pops up on one of the screens in this control room, and it's a message from Mission Control that basically says that the whole mission has been about investigating this monolith that we've seen at the beginning of the film, and with the crater, we saw this monolith again and again, and of course it has to come back because why would it not be important?
I think they said that like the monolith had like a radio signal and it was like pointing to Jupiter or something, so they sent this mission out to go investigate it to like see what they could find, because they like assumed it was like signs of intelligent life out in the universe, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it always seems to pop up when life is starting, right? So you think about it at the beginning of the movie, it's there because intelligent life is starting, and then it pops up on, I think it was the moon, right?
Yeah.
And now it's out there, so they're out there, yes, investigating it.
Yeah. And so Dave, he goes and pilots the ship to where he's supposed to end up.
And I think it's important also to realize, I think he has no choice because there's no air in the ship.
Yeah.
Right? And so he has what's in his helmet. And I think isn't he in his helmet when he goes into the ship at the beginning?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, so he goes into the pod to go out to explore this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he gets to Jupiter and he's circling the moons, and we see the monolith is like floating in space around one of the moons. And Dave then goes out into one of these EVA pods, and he's sort of looking around, and then his pod gets like sucked into a light tunnel, and
This scene's weird too.
We see like this whole like 5-minute light show of
5 minutes. It felt like 4 hours.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, it did drag on a little bit long.
And it was just like the same thing. It was just like lights flashing by you, and then every once in a while it would cut back to his face for like a few milliseconds, and he just looked really weird.
Yeah.
Well, it was on his eyeball, and then when he would blink, it would change colors.
Yeah.
You know, they spoofed that part a lot of places, like in The Simpsons, for example.
Yeah.
I watched The Simpsons once where they're making fun of that.
Yeah, it was like a cool light show considering that it was 1968 when they did all these effects. And I mean, the whole movie is really great, I feel, because of how like it looks pretty real, like all the sets and most of the effects and CGI looks pretty real, which I thought was really cool for 1968. But yeah, the light show does go on for very long, and then it cuts to Dave's eye, and it's like colored, but then it slowly starts to fade back to normal, and then it cuts again, and the whole pod that Dave is in like this futuristic mansion almost.
In like a old white bedroom.
Yeah. It's like a white bedroom. The floors are like glowing because there's lights under the floors and stuff, and everything's just white and like a really light blue. And he's sort of staring out into this bedroom, and then you see him, like, it cuts, and he is standing, like, across the room, and then it cuts to, like, a really close-up of his face, and you can see he's, like, older. His face is kind of wrinkled. And then it keeps doing these cuts to show, like, it goes from this older version of Dave to a really old version of Dave, like, sitting in a chair eating dinner.
Yeah, he's like an old man eating soup.
Yeah.
That's like the
Then
big part of that scene.
He like knocks a glass over on the floor and it like shatters. It's like the whole thing's very strange.
Yeah,
I was so confused watching it.
I must admit that I don't know if I get the ending totally, but yeah, it was just an interesting ending because like it then cuts again from him being really old to even older, laying in this big bed.
It's his deathbed. He's like dying.
It's his deathbed, and he like reaches his hand out, and then it cuts, and you see the monolith is like in the room
sitting
with him.
in front of
it's
him,
like
right like at the foot of his bed.
Yeah,
it's like spying on him.
Yeah. And then it cuts again, and instead of it being like this old Dave in his deathbed, it's like this glowing orb with a fetus in it.
Mm-hmm.
And
no, that's exactly it. It's a fetus.
Yeah. That goes back to like the beginning of life that this monolith brings. And so yeah, this fetus like then floats out, and it starts circling, I think it was Earth.
Yes.
Yeah, it starts circling Earth again, and Also Sprach Zarathustra begins to play again to signal like, oh, this is another big advancement. And then the movie ends.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that's basically it.
Yeah. So, Mr. Binder, thoughts?
So, I understand the people who are especially creative might be drawn to this because it is, there's no argument, it is creative.
Yeah.
It was unlike anything in 1968, right, that people had seen. When you think about Star Wars was 8 years later, and that was pushing the edge of technology. So yeah, he definitely did a lot of things for this movie. He didn't only direct this movie, he was the editor of the movie. He edited his own film. He had his own, director's cut. He was the director of of special effects on the movie as well.
Yeah.
So in terms of film, this is where he had his hands in the most, I think, in his career. Even a fun little fact there is the breathing sounds that you hear. That's actually Stanley Kubrick's breathing. He
Oh,
fully
I
did his
didn't know
own
that.
breathing sounds. So I have loved science my whole life. I'm a science geek. I love Star Wars. I love all things science. And I was a science teacher for many, many years. Still am, technically. And what I love about this movie is it is so scientifically accurate to the T. I mean, he was so detailed. It was one of the first, when you watch a sci-fi movie and a rocket ship is flying through space, you hear the sound, you hear that sound, as it's flying around. That didn't happen in 2001. When things are flying around in space, there's no sound. Just like there is no sound in real life. Everything was done with reality. The airlock scene.
There was no sound, was there? Yeah.
There was no sound. And there was an explosion, which is exactly right. And that scene actually is extremely realistic. If you were stuck in a pod and had to go in and had to blow out the airlock, if you held your breath, it wouldn't feel good, but you would survive that. And that's pretty much exactly what it would look like. And how do you even film that scene?
Yeah.
Because it looked like they dropped the anchor, it looked like they dropped the actor 30 feet. How do you set up a studio to film that? So all of that is just so well done. Hal's a great character. I would argue Dave and Frank, the tension there's a lot of good stuff right there in the middle. But then there's all this just, it's like trying to combine science with the art. And so you go in with all these questions, and I don't think it answers questions. I don't think it's supposed to answer questions. And I respect that, but I personally don't like those kinds of things. So when people talk about Kubrick, that's just the element of his filmmaking that I personally don't like. And so when you ask me for a recommendation about, what's a movie people talk about that they like that you really don't recommend, I'd be like, oh yeah, that 2001 would be it.
Yeah.
Now, you watched a movie last time, Aliens, which I said is one of the few movies where, in my opinion, the sequel is better than the original. Like, I love Aliens, and Alien is good, but Aliens is just that much better. Well, one of my favorite movies as a kid was 2010. So 2010 is actually the sequel to 2001. And I highly recommend 2010. So I saw 2010 first. Now, 2010 does not get the scientific details right. But 2010 explains all that stuff that happened at the end of 2001. But then I go back and watch 2001, and it's just too trippy at the end.
Yeah.
Like, I understand there's meaning in there.
Yeah.
But it's too 60s kind of. Did you ever watch Willy Wonka, like the original Willy Wonka?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so the original Willy Wonka, they get on the boat.
Yeah.
And they start going through the boat tunnel,
Yeah.
and they had like this acid trip, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they cut a chicken's head off in a children's movie in the movie, and it's like, okay, Willy Wonka is great, taking that scene out. You don't need that scene in there, and not to step on Kubrick, but I would enjoy 2001 if it didn't have all the extra stuff in it, like the bone thing at the beginning, like it just.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, but like that really, I feel like it just didn't fit with the rest of it.
I can
it was kind of like,
understand what he was doing with it, but
well, now Ryan, you admitted to me that you did not really care for this,
Yeah.
but Meredith, you said, I think I kind of liked it. So I'm curious as to where you came to that in your own way.
I mean, I just like the part that had plot, and I mean, the first 45 minutes, I was kind of like, okay, can we just get into a plot? But once it actually got into the plot and like getting to see all of these really intricate sets and like the scenes that you just talked about, like how accurate they were and how kind of different they are from normal sci-fi movies and in their accuracy. I really enjoyed that because just like I like watching movies that do have good cinematography, good sound editing, stuff like that. And so seeing like those parts of this movie, I really enjoyed that. But there were some parts where I was like, okay, can we just kind of get on with it? Like, you know.
I feel like, I mean, even watching it, it starts with 3 minutes of a black screen. I mean, I was kind of like, this is going to be boring, isn't it? And then there's just like 45 minutes of like random stuff and there's like no plot. I did like a lot of the story, like the stuff with Hal. I thought was like fantastic. I thought that was a really interesting idea, but I feel like that would have been better as a standalone movie and not mixed in with like the Monolith stuff, because I feel like the Monolith stuff was kind of just like weird and didn't really fit with that, and like I admit I didn't really understand it. I mean, I like weird movies, I have to admit. Like, towards the end of it, I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting, even though I don't understand it. But also, at the same time, I was thinking, thank God it's over. I can go play video games or something now. So
Now, you're going to have to fact check me. And so if we're wrong right here, you can just cut this out, right? But I believe the book existed first. I think 2001 is a book.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That was all around for a while. And it's actually a series. There's a 2010. I think there's also a 2037. There's a third sequel book that they haven't made a film out of. So I think Kubrick it's kind of a weird book. And I think he did a good job trying to portray the tone of the book. And that's where I think a lot of the weird pieces come from. And again, that's my opinion, weird. I just don't think, I mean, in the 1980s when I saw this, which was 20 years later, I wouldn't think it would survive a movie theater. I just can't imagine if you released this in 2021 or 2022 that people would go and watch it. I think it would just get trashed, no matter how good the cinematography is. I just don't see that movie getting made today.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's very strange. There's definitely an audience for it, but I mean, nowadays, people aren't really looking to watch that kind of movie. They're trying to watch something more concrete, something more that, as you said, like, explains the stuff going on, because it really didn't explain anything.
Yeah. I mean, there is kind of a market today for open-ended movies that, like, leave you thinking or, like, interpreting your own ending, but I think something, like, as open-ended as this, and also something that starts off so slow, would not last that long in like a movie theater, just because people like to get into plot. They like to get into, like, people don't necessarily have time to sit around and watch a 3-hour movie that starts with 45 minutes of just music and cinematography. But I, like, for people who really love film and are dedicated to like exploring different types of film, I think people still do enjoy this movie a lot.
Oh, I think you must watch this if you're into film.
Yeah.
Which, again, is why I, quote, recommended it. Because if you have an interest in film, this is something you need to see. Because if you can't discuss this film, you're not going to be able to discuss any film.
Yeah. So something we've done in our past episodes to close it out is give the movie a rating out of 10. How would you rate this out of 10, Mr. Binder?
Oh, my goodness. Well, that's extremely tough. See, okay, I'll admit, when I'm flipping through the channels, I know that's a very archaic thing to do, but when I'm going through the guide, if 2001 is on, I will actually tune in to see where it is in the movie. If we're anywhere in the first 45 minutes, I'll hook up the PlayStation and play something. Then I'll come back to it and I'll be like, oh, good, we're in the Hal scenes. I love the Hal scenes. I would almost argue that the Hal scene, that the part of the plot that actually moves, I'd give it a 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
Everything on either side of it, I give it a 2 out of 10. And only a 2 because there is some symbolism there with the monolith that's kind of creative. And special effects, I'm going to give him the special effects. So, okay, if we wash everything out, I'd give it a 5. But, I mean, you really got to be into it in order for it to even be a 5.
Yeah, I would agree with a 5 probably. Like a 5 or 6 is what I would give it. What would you give it?
I gave it like a 6.5 just for cinematography, scientific accuracy, stuff like that. But the plot that did drag sort of brought that rating down for me.
And this is one of those movies I feel where, you just went through and gave the whole movie. So spoiler alert, there's everything. But even if you know everything, I still think you can watch this.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like a Sixth Sense where if you know what's going on in Sixth Sense, you're just not going to,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you don't have to bother with the movie. Here, I still think you watch it. So even if it's a 5, yeah. Consider it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, do you have anything else to add, Ryan?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Mr. Bender, for coming to speak with us today.
Oh, it was fun. Thank you.
I'm glad. And we will see you next week. We're not sure what movie we're going to ask Mr. Bender for yet, but
I've got some ideas.
Okay.
All right, we'll find out. But thank you for listening. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Meredith.
I'm Mr. Bender.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you
Yep.
for listening.
See ya.
See ya.